Hello, good afternoon, colleagues and students. Thank you for joining the second episode of the talk series, Challenges of Virtual Teaching and Learning in Humanities Education. I'm Connie from the Department of Chinese Language and Literature, the Associate Dean of Education of the Arts Faculty, and the moderator of the talk today. The pandemic has caused a great shift in many aspects of our lives and has completely changed the landscape of higher education. And today, we are honored to have two experienced arts scholars, Professor Morley from Department of History and Professor Wang from Department of Music, to discuss with us a range of matters associated with online teaching and learning at CUHK under the topic Pragmatics for Enhancing Online Pedagogy, an Arts and Humanities Perspective. First of all, let me introduce our guest speakers. Professor Morley is an urban historian and researcher. Since 2009, he has successfully received 11 different teaching grants. He has been a recipient of the Arts Faculty Outstanding Teaching Award 7 times, and is a senior fellow of Advanced HE in the UK. And Professor Lee is a composer, pianist, and theorist. She is also the Associate Dean of Development of our graduate school. She has a strong interest in music composition, pedagogy, and has received various grants for development of her music composition courses. So our talk will commence with the presentations of our guest speakers, and then will be followed by a Q&A section. So if you have any questions you would like to ask or any ideas you would like to share with them, please put them in the box of Q&A. So now we shouldn't waste any time, and let's start with Professor Morley, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much, Connie, for the introduction and the invitation to speak. And equally, thank you, Holly, in the Arts Faculty Office for arranging everything today. I'm just going to open up a very simple PowerPoint. So hopefully everybody should be able to see that on the screen. So as Professor Kwong indicated, since 2020, essentially, there's been a seismic shift in our practice of teaching. And this again is very, very important. We have now a sense of empiricism as to what works, maybe what works less well for us within the context of our courses. But what I wish to do is really discuss from a teaching development grant project that ended last year, discuss some of the findings from a student's perspective as to how maybe pedagogy can be enhanced within the arts faculty. So I'll go to my second slide. Now, again, we're all, as teachers, or even maybe some of you who are PhD students in the audience, you've got some familiarity with the experience of e-learning. But as I mentioned, from 2020, we've gone from e-learning to support the lecture to exclusively online learning. And that's been a major change. And again, what was very important in that change was that what works in the lecture face-to-face doesn't necessarily work in a Zoom situation. So we've had to modify not only what we teach, but the way that we teach it. And I think, therefore, we always should have in our curriculum design and our teaching practice a number of basic questions really at the forefront of what we're doing and why we're doing it. So the first question is, what is teaching and learning success? And equally, how can we create it? Okay, so what creates teaching and learning success? That's very important, because as teachers, what we think good pedagogy is sometimes different from what students understand it to be. And then equally, there's likewise, there's another question to ask, which is, how do I design a teaching strategy that will be able to guide knowledge growth and learning motivation? And I always define knowledge as not just teaching information, it's ultimately skills as well. So it's facts and skills. So as I've said, the shift to this wholly online situation, which we've experienced for about 4 of the last 5 terms, something like that, has made us think about our design, our delivery, and equally our management and assessment of students. And again, it's challenged us in numerous different ways. Because again, as I said, what works in the lecture hall doesn't, when you're face-to-face teaching, doesn't necessarily work as successfully when you move into a wholly online situation. And again, this is really important. And I'm sure Wendy, Professor Lee will talk about this more. This is a really important issue to remember if you go into hybrid teaching. Because hybrid requires a lot of thinking and a lot of preparation in order to do it successfully. So again, this project that I'm going to use in the presentation today essentially was formed with two broad goals, which was to really understand, firstly, to understand the processes that create academic success for learners in the arts and humanities when they are faced with the prospect of learning wholly online. And then the second matter was how to think about designing teaching strategies, as I've said, that will guide learning growth, knowledge growth, and learning motivation. So in all, as part of this project, 4 questionnaires totaling 54 questions were given to students, and we received almost 1,000 responses, and more than 50, 60 interviews were undertaken with students. So in a sense, we've got a body of information, as I say, from issued from 1,000 different people. And again, principally what I want to talk about is the year 2, year 4 students for us, because these are students who, in a sense, in the last 3 years, of their university experience has been completely redrawn from what we would under normal circumstances. And again, they were very tolerant, I felt, towards teachers, but generally found that online learning was not the same as what they thought classroom teaching should be. Although they were, 2 out of every 3 basically felt that online education was good. They didn't think it was as good, I should say, as when they were in classroom teaching. And importantly as well, about 7 in 10 experienced problems in their learning process. So again, that issue of management is very, very important. Again, what was very important with students was the ability of their teacher, when giving online education, to engage the learner, to motivate the learner to engage with the information, with the course that was being given. And again, what essentially students expressed they would like was really active learning. Okay. Discussions, although I'll come to this a little bit later, there's some kind of contradictory responses from the students in many regards, but they wanted active learning, although in many cases the students were not so active in their actual Zoom time learning. But again, one of the things that they found was it was a kind of different emotional relationship they had with the learning process when compared from a classroom situation. And again, for many, I think when it was very teacher-oriented form of education, they kind of quoted it as being like watching a YouTube video. It really tested their concentration and their interest in what was being put forward. So again, there's ways and means, I think, that we can get around that problem in order to promote interactive, engaging, and successful education, which is what ultimately we as teachers wish to give and which our students want to experience. So again, as I said, in comparative terms, classroom teaching, classroom education is more engaging to students. And one of the key points they pulled out was the issue of relationship with the teacher. And I think, again, what is very, very important about online education is flaws in our teaching process that can be very, very minor become exacerbated in an online context. So sometimes if you're a little bit flippant in the classroom, the students can see your face and they kind of brush it off. But when sometimes if you're tired or you're irritable or whatever, when you're online, students really can take that in a slightly much different way, stronger way. So I think, again, how we try to engage, how we encourage our students to participate, and equally how we communicate. Communication management is really, really vital to letting the students know that a teacher is there to wholly support the learning process, that students feel that need. And as I said, really, what students are looking for are 3 things. They're looking for communication, they're looking for interaction, and they're looking for participation. Now, again, in terms of participation, as I said, there's contradictions, because one of the things when students were, for instance, put into, say, debate or discussion learning scenarios, most students actually didn't participate, or a great number of students didn't. They felt that that learning situation could be too dominated by more vocal students in the class. So even though they have knowledge and a willingness to contribute to debate, they just found it somewhat off-putting. And again, one of the things that I found was that if you wish to engage in debates with students, don't just have an open mic. Rather, the best thing to do is create a poll. So in Zoom, for instance, use the poll facility. And the students felt, again, that they had an ownership, they had a piece of capital in the learning process when they were given that facility to use. As I've said, really, when it came to online discussions, or in particular being put out in breakout rooms, most students didn't feel that it was a positive, or it didn't contribute as in a positive sense to what they want from the teaching experience. Overall, though, again, very, very importantly, about 8 in 10 students felt a decline in their general happiness with learning when they are wholly online. About 1 in 4 believed that the lack of access hadn't hindered their knowledge growth. And only 13% felt that online learning had not hindered skill growth. So again, very, very important. Increase in unhappiness and an increase in stress. With about 1 in 3 students feeling, and again, it's a perception, that teachers demonstrated little or no concern for learning support. So again, very, very important issue, the issue of management once again. I think, again, what is important is that in the questionnaires, we found a range of different answers. When we asked students to explain what they wanted, we found something like 85 different words were used. But ultimately, it keeps coming back to the same words: interaction, participation, and communication. They were the core features that students desired. As I said, things like poll functions, CUHK, which is an online quiz facility. Students like YouTube when it was used in for short video features. Again, very, very important, but equally what the students wanted was clear direction. What are we doing in the class? What is happening? What is the purposes of what's going on? And the feeling with the teaching assistant that the teacher is really supporting that process. There's a little bit there about students and their negativity towards hybrid learning, and I'll leave that to Wendy because she's going to talk about that much more. So I'll just skip through that. Maybe we can use that for the Q&A. But as I said, equally, what was important to students and their general happiness was the feeling that teachers struggled to use online technology, that platforms that were available were not being wholly utilized. In other words, teachers were using them in too limited, I hence kind of don't want to use the word one-dimensional education, but I think, again, where a lot of Zoom use was given to students, the students felt it was often too limited in their view as to what could be done with the class, and instead what was actually given to them. And equally, about 30% of students felt that if something went wrong, the teacher had no backup plan, which I think is a really, really important thing to just to remember, particularly when if you're trying to promote hybrid, because again, there's that incredible reliance on the use of software. If something goes wrong, what do you do? And equally, only about 1 in 3 students felt that the teachers encouraged them to feel like they belonged to an online community. So 2 in 3 students felt, I suppose, lonely, if you want to use that word, when they're in a online classroom situation. And I think, again, that's because they felt that they were not being engaged by the student, not being brought by the teacher, excuse me, not being brought into discussion or debate exercises, that kind of thing. But I think, again, I'll come to this maybe a bit later. Monitoring of students was, again, very, very important because, as I've said, there was a feeling sometimes that more vocal students were able to kind of dominate, and therefore other students had knowledge, but just felt hindered in their ability to speak and be listened to. And I think, again, that's the important thing. I mean, ultimately, again, students have a very kind of critical perception as to what they want from their teacher when they're in an online learning, exclusively online learning situation. They want teachers to be welcoming, they want teachers to be open-minded, they want teachers to be accessible. So the personality, the need for personality comes across much, much stronger than it necessarily does in a classroom situation. And as I've said, one of the things about breakout rooms that students felt was that they were not engaging, they were not effective. There was often quiet rather than talking that was taking place. So therefore, again, many students, 3 and 4, felt that they were unable to participate or didn't participate when online debates were put to them. They felt that there was a lack of management issue. And again, I think what's really, really important, and this is something maybe, I know the EDB won't listen to this, but or the RGC, but students felt that though they were stopped from going on field trips because of social restrictions, they were still willing to undertake them, even if they would undertake them by themselves. They still wanted to get out in the field. They still wanted, if possible, to come into the library. And again, this was one of the things about their lack of happiness. They realized, or they'd taken the library for granted basically before, and then they realized that there was this incredible body of information which they now could not have access to. And although teachers were trying their best to supply information, online things, everything in the library is not online. Archives are not digitized, and therefore in certain areas, certain arts areas, certain humanities fields, students were feeling that, again, the quality of the education they were having in the wholly online context was not the same as what people in previous years had had. It had diminished essentially in depth of quality. Really, I think there's an imbalance. What students identify very strongly in the online situation, an imbalance between what is teacher-centered learning and what is student-centered learning. And I think this, again, is really, really important. How can you involve, how can you empower students as learners when you're in an online setting? It's very, very challenging to speak to all students. But this is something, as I said, that is critical to our success as pedagogical conduits with our students. And again, support is very, very important. We need to make sure that we're communicating, we're open, we're responsive in very, very friendly ways. A lot of students found that there was inadequate learning support, that teachers were slow to respond to emails, sometimes didn't even respond. So maybe, again, a way around that is to open up social media groups. And that way the teachers and the students are all accessible and see things in real time. And I know some other universities have done this kind of thing. And as I said, the breakout room, very unsatisfactory to many students. But equally, and again, I've used the word kind of contradiction. Students did prefer to be either have an in-class or 100% in-class or 100% online, not some hybrid. They found it very kind of confusing. And I think, again, this is something for the university to, as we go forward, to really, really think about. So just really to kind of bring things to a close, and I apologize, I'm having to kind of run over a number of things quite quickly. Of course, student environment, the home environment, it can be very, very challenging for students sometimes. They're particularly in public housing, small size property, they have no personal and physical space, and this affects their learning process. Again, the importance of understanding that Zoom is limiting in the student's mind in creating frequent and meaningful interaction between teacher and student. But likewise, I've mentioned that point about online materials. Yes, we can put materials onto Blackboard, but students are aware that there's things in the library that are not digitized and that they cannot get, or many students can't get access to. As I've said, the management issue is very, very important, and the role of the TA, how the TA works, how the TA supports the teacher to students is very, very important. So I think that needs to be clear ultimately to your students at the very start of any course, should we continue to be exclusively online. But I just want to raise that point about really, for instance, things like hybrid teaching. We are not trained in hybrid teaching. There needs to be institutional training schemes, substantially formed, and there needs to be an investment of time and money and energy so that we can do this form of learning. If the university is moving forward and wants us to do face-to-face or hybrid teaching, it's at the moment very, very hit and miss. It's based on our experiences and what we do, and equally what we don't do as to how successful it is or not. So I think that's really, really important. I know there's other institutions in Hong Kong that have put investment into training schemes. It's not to say CUHK doesn't, it puts money into different things for our training, but I think actual hands-on training is really, really important. Like this year, you know, last term, we were told 5 days notice, we're going to go onto hybrid. You cannot change a course to hybrid in 5 days. It's impossible. It takes so much time, so much effort, so much planning, preparation. It's very, very difficult. But just as a final point, really some of the things that I've talked about today about the context of trying to teach in social disorder, what is online learning from a student's perspective, and again, this kind of new normal that we're in. I've written 3 short papers that you can find these online quite easily. If you Google my name and then the Australian journal CUHK Connect, you can find these 3 short papers that deal directly, raise the main points from surveys that I've undertaken in the last 2 years with students. But thank you for the time, and I'm very happy to field any questions if anybody has any. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Morley, for your Professor Morley, for your enlightening presentation. And based on your project findings, I think it gives us a clear picture of perceptions of us students on online teaching and learning. So please, if you have questions or anything you would like to share, put them in the box of Q&A. And I think Professor Lee is going to share with us her experience and research on hybrid teaching and learning from another perspective. Please, Wendy.
Thank you, Professor Kwong. So after Professor Morley has done all the heavy lifting on online teaching and learning, I'll be more focusing on hybrid teaching and learning in general, and speak specifically about our project, how Ian and I had gotten together was through this teaching and learning grant. And so it has been a great pleasure working with Professor Morley, and I wanted to share a little bit of what we've done for this project. So if you would please allow me to share my PowerPoint. Okay, so the title of our project is Heightening Undergraduate Educational Performance in the Arts by Means of Harnessing Hybrid Teaching. So because Ian and I are in 2 different fields in the humanities, our goal for this project was to create something that is practical relating to hybrid teaching and learning that would be helpful to undergraduate students in particular, but also to instructors in both of our departments at the very least. So our project here is not so field specific, but we're hoping to generate something that would be useful to people in arts and humanities, in particular, undergraduate students. So some of the things which we had done for this project, of course, we had to know what is hybrid teaching in the first place. And then I will talk about how we had to reflect on our own experiences on some of it. And we conducted surveys and interviews, and probably some of you who are here right now have been harassed by us through email from Holly and all of that. And so we're really grateful for the data that you've given us so that we can speak about them a little bit today. And then we presented some of the findings at the recent Community of Practices Symposium Education, Innovation, and Technology event that was held on June 2nd, I believe. And then the culmination of this project actually is a website that we are still in the making, but almost done with some animated videos, which I will share some with you. So the first thing is when we got our feet wet on the subject of hybrid learning. Ian definitely has a lot more experiences than myself on the subject. So I found that it's necessary for us to talk about what exactly is a hybrid course. I think most of us know that it's a combination of in-person teaching as well as online learning, but there are things that we can do in a hybrid course that can go beyond the capabilities of each of these separately. So I hear the quote, I like this very much. This was taken from a book published by Garrison and Vaughan called Blended Learning in Higher Education Framework, Principles and Guidelines. And here it's sort of like a pretty often used definition on hybrid learning. So here allow me to read: hybrid learning combines the properties and possibilities of both face-to-face classrooms and online teaching to go beyond the capabilities of each separately. It recognizes the strengths of integrating verbal and text-based communication, which we don't usually do in person teaching, but we can do that on online settings, sorry, and creates a unique fusion of these two words are often used: synchronous and asynchronous, direct and mediated modes of communication, in that the proportion of face-to-face and online learning activities may vary considerably. As Professor Morley just mentioned, at the very beginning when we're asked to do hybrid teaching, I think many of us had to scramble to figure out how to put our in-person teaching materials into the online mode. So, and because of the limited preparation time, a lot of this was just basically synchronous teaching. But of course, the ideal hybrid course design would involve a combination of both in-person meetings and also asynchronous materials as well. So looking further in this topic, I found an interesting table, and it's called decision-making matrix. I think this, to me, is definitely not something that's applicable to everyone. And the things that are listed in here, if you can see, the words are very small. They're pretty common sense. But basically, to me, it's sort of like a checklist when you're having to do, when you're having to design a hybrid course. There are certain things that you have to consider. And so perhaps it would be useful to go through this checklist, and then hopefully that would help assist our decision-making in how we design course materials for our hybrid courses. But also, what comes out of all of this literature is, again, relating to what Professor Morley had emphasized, is the student engagement part. Because even in a hybrid mode, students often are not sure, they're confused, because it can be sometimes in person, and then maybe another few weeks it would be online. And so there's a tendency in much of the literature that I saw anyway, that the students often take the online components less seriously. And that's very problematic if we really put a lot of emphasis on the online teaching resources. So that's something that was that sort of like a red flag to us that we needed to solve. And the big thing here with online courses is always the technological issues, whether it's equipment failure or internet connections or anything dealing with technology. You may have tested it a minute before and somehow something always seems to go wrong. So in that situation, both as an instructor or as a student, what should you do in that situation? So we don't have any definitive advice of that, but we do have some videos later to share with you. Okay, and moving along is, of course, most of this project is we have to reflect on our own experiences on Zoom teaching and figure out how we can improve from that. And I'm sure all of you who've taught on Zoom will share with us these feelings that why are students reluctant to turn on their cameras? I don't know what they're doing. They can be hiding, they can be doing multiple things. But for some reason, students are more willing to ask questions via chat. And it's somewhat difficult to generate class discussions. And again, back to network problems. But these are very general, and I'm sure maybe some of you have had different experiences, but just reflecting on our own experiences, these are the things that really seem to have bothered us. And of course, for music, it's very important for the audiovisual qualities, and it's very frustrating not to be able to hear things in a synchronous mode. Of course, I understand that there are different types of apps that you can use that would help solve this problem, but not at the very beginning of when we had to do hybrid teaching right off the bat. We found out through, we learned things the hard way, but at the very beginning, it was quite frustrating. So what we did also, in addition to our own experiences, we have to make this a little bit more scientifically. So we conducted surveys. So we conducted 2 different types of surveys with the students. And for the first student survey, we had 60 respondents from the Faculty of Arts. And so this is sort of a breakdown of the 60 respondents in terms of their departments. So it's quite interesting. And of course, there's a lot for history because Professor Morley had helped promote this. But it's quite good that we were able to reach out to some of those departments that we didn't have much contact with in the first place. And so here are some of the sample questions that we asked the students, basically about their satisfaction with hybrid teaching or aspects of hybrid teaching. Has hybrid teaching facilitated your learning? Is it more difficult compared to in-person teaching, or what? In a way, because at the beginning we're trying to figure out how the students felt with all the things that we were scrambling to do. We needed some feedback, but of course, in a class situation, we really cannot receive this kind of feedback. So we thought, okay, and it came at a time when the students were actually very busy with everything. So we were very thankful we still have 60 respondents to this type of survey. So here's very interesting, just a sample result from the first survey was somewhat related to what Professor Morley just said. The largest percentage, as you can see, is more in-person lessons. But bear in mind, this is more in-person lessons than online, which means you're not ruling out online completely. That's what the biggest portion is. And then the second one is more online than in person, which is less. And then 2 equal weighted ones would be only in person or equal portion of in-person and online. And then the rest is only online. So this huge percentage here gave us an indication that we should pursue further with the online part, because it says more in-person lessons, but that means there's some degree of usefulness for the online one. So we decided to do a second survey to just the students, and this time we received a little bit more participants, 88 of them, spanning from these different departments. And then again, designing these forms, surveys to them. And I have to mention that we had an extremely helpful research assistant. Her name is Han-Ki Choi, who had helped us conduct most of these surveys. And so we're very grateful. She's not here right now. She's actually in Canada, but it was very helpful of her to help us on this. And so with these second survey, of course, the questions were an extension from the first survey. And here are some of the results that we've generated. Of course, this is not the only chart that we have. We had a whole series of that, but again, it seems to be very interesting that we always go back to the technical issues. As you can see here, bad internet connection really can ruin your day, and lack of suitable space, audio issues, and problems with communicating with professors or other students is also an issue. So there are some issues that we need to solve if we want to continue to explore online learning and teaching. So now we go to the faculties, the students, and we were very grateful to have 19 respondents from the Faculty of Arts teachers. And then again, another type of survey was conducted, this time from the from the teaching perspective and not so much on the learning side. And again, as you can see in this chart, still is the technical issues with the problem for hybrid teaching. And again, this chart seems to be coming back again and again, even for the faculties. So we were very frustrated that this has, this is such a simple thing, yet has affected all of us in the online setting. So we decided to do something about it. And before we decided on what exactly to do for our culmination of the project, we interviewed individuals, because in the previous surveys, those were quick questions and you cannot really write your feedback, or sometimes there's a lot of the confidential information that you may not want to put on that kind of survey, but in a more informal setting, when we talk with you, then maybe there's a lot more inside information that we can get. So 3 very brave souls of students were, we interviewed them, and again, we have a whole series of questions asking them. I cannot share most of the information here because we promised them that everything is going to be confidential. And same thing with the faculties. We also had another set of questions when we interviewed the faculties. Each person we interviewed around 30 minutes, both for each student and each faculty. We had 30 minutes of interviews, and then we had a series of questions asking them, and we generated a ton of very useful data. So at that junction, here are some of the advantages, which all of you know. Again, I'm not telling you anything new. Everybody loves the convenience, and we can involve international guests and speakers. That's one very good thing about internationalization and collaborations. And students can review recorded lectures and online materials at any time in person setting. That's not quite possible. So many students enjoy this. And many also like the chat and whiteboard function because they can participate a little bit passively, but still participating. But of course, there are major disadvantages, which we've said many times, is the social interaction part, which Professor Morley had alluded earlier. And that definitely affected the psychological well-being of our students and instructors. And at the very beginning, it's very difficult to switch between face-to-face and online, but something can be done so that we can make the shift easier. And as Professor Morley also said, there's mixed opinion on the breakout rooms. And for instructors, there's a lot of problems in student assessments. I'm sure those who are teaching will have experienced this. So having had all of this data and we're still digesting some of that, what we have come up with was that perhaps we can try and see if we can have a hybrid class or a hybrid mode planned right at the beginning of the course. Rather than being asked or forced to do this, we design something that's intentionally for a hybrid course. And then in this case, then instructors can minimize some of the, because they can anticipate what the disadvantages would be, they can minimize the impact of those disadvantages. And then maybe they can also, require students to set up some reasonable expectations for them, like maybe can they perhaps turn on their cameras or something that would help us gauge their reactions a little bit better. So what we decided to do for this project in the end was a website. And this is a website with a bunch of animated videos. These are basically modules. Sorry, I keep clicking the wrong button. Getting started on Zoom, your online use, and the hybrid setting. For us, it's basically like 3 different modules from elementary, intermediate, advanced sort of thing of your Zoom proficiency. So what we could use was that perhaps an instructor with a large group of incoming undergraduates who have never or have very little experience taking online classes, the instructor can give this website to the student and ask the students to view these separate modules. And by the end of having watched these videos in a particular module, then the instructor can give them a quiz. And the quiz data is going to be directly generated back to the instructor. In fact, the quiz questions can be altered to suit the instructor's needs. And then hopefully with that as a basis, at least the instructors will know a student having watched these videos will mean that they will probably know how Zoom will function in a class, and then that can ease out a lot of the things that were a mess before. So that was kind of our intention. So now I would like to share the website with you. Could please give me 1 second. Okay. And sorry, just okay. Okay, so we're still fine-tuning some of the things on this website, but basically this is it. So that an instructor who's interested in getting their students know more about the online learning bits and pieces can use this website. So first, the about part, we have some information about this project. You don't have to read this. Some of the resources, which we will put more, so we haven't finalized this yet. And then contact us is basically me and Professor Morley. But the student will click here to start. And then you click here, you have 3 different modules. So as the instructor, perhaps if it's an undergraduate class with a lot of undergraduate students who have never taken Zoom classes, perhaps the instructor can require the students to view all 3 different modules. And upon viewing each of these modules, we have designed a quiz that the students can take. And then the answers and the results of the quizzes will go directly back to the instructor, so the instructor will know how much the students have learned from these modules. So now I'd like to show So basically, these are 3 different modules with different animated videos. So now I would like to share one with you. And let's go to this one. So this one is what we really want students to do is, of course, to turn on your camera. And of course, many students still feel uncomfortable, but if we can try to convince them by saying that if you turn on your camera, you can help us, you can have a better experience on Zoom too. So maybe they will try doing that. I don't know, that's a long stretch, but here's a video that is very short that I would like to play for you, and maybe you'll see, get a sense of what we've been doing in this project.
Mika doesn't turn on her camera during Zoom class. However, with her camera off, her instructor cannot tell if Mika is engaged in class. For a moment, let's imagine how the professor feels when all of her students turn off their cameras. She is talking to a screen full of black boxes. It is hard to tell how her students reacted to her teaching. She asks Mika a question about a topic from last class, and there is no answer. The professor decides to repeat what she taught last class, in case her students did not understand. Mika notices that her professor is repeating what she said last week, so she becomes more bored and loses the motivation to learn. What should Mika do? Turn on your camera. Turning on your camera shows your instructor that you are present in class. Visual cues, such as nodding of the head or looking confused, can inform your instructor how much you have understood. Then, she can adjust her teaching to give everyone a better experience on Zoom. Another reason to turn on your camera is to stay alert. With your professor and your whole class seeing you, you can be more focused. If you don't want your class to see what your home looks like, we suggest you use Zoom's virtual background to hide your surroundings. After turning on her camera, Mika finally feels she is part of an actual class. She also enjoys seeing how her classmates respond to each other's ideas. As for her professor, she can see that her students are tired of listening to her talk after 30 minutes. So Professor Brown decides to give her students a short break in the middle of the class. Her students enjoy her Zoom class more than before.
Okay, so this is a sort of a sample of what we've done. I'm looking at the time, so I will stop with this and go back to the PowerPoint for a little bit. Okay. So we have the quizzes, and these are some of the answers on the quizzes. So basically, if an instructor is interested, we'll send them the website link and also the quizzes that they can use. Of course, they can fine-tune things, and then the data will be going back to the teacher. So hopefully that can be useful. We've presented some of the data of our projects at the recent symposium, so I won't bore you here. And at the end, I just wanted to say, so that project with Ian had helped me reflect on my own teaching, and specifically in music composition as well. And so for my own separate teaching and learning project, I had also created a bunch of micromodules for extended techniques, and that is on YouTube right now. It has generated quite a number of views and feedback, and so I think this has been very useful for not particularly for my students. Actually, I found out from some of my former contacts who didn't know about this, that they looked online and found it. So I was very grateful that they had viewed this. But I think I don't have any definitive conclusion or whatever on the projects, but I think we're still learning as the pandemic evolves, and a lot of what I've talked about is common sense, but I think that students also need to know that they are an essential part of hybrid learning. So what how they respond will significantly affect how we instructors design our courses. So that's it, I think, for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lee, for your wonderful presentation with lots of insights. Thank you. Let me see. Let's say, I think we still have around 10 minutes And let's come to the Q&A section. We do have a very important question raised by our colleague Martin, especially for Professor Morley. Maybe I briefly introduce the question. A colleague found that one of the frustrating parts of online teaching was that students asked for participation or interaction, but would actually only engage in the mildest form, like, for example, the polls just mentioned by Professor Morley in his presentation. Given the ineffectiveness of breakout rooms, he would like to know, did any more meaningful discussion activities work for both of you, maybe, or anyone surveyed? So that's the question. And maybe Professor Morley, you would like to answer first.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Look, I think just culturally in Hong Kong, students are not receptive to just open debate, open forums. Some students are, but if you wish to generalize, it's more often a less successful exercise than it is successful. What I suggest is, if you wish to have engagement and get the students to interact with you, not necessarily, as you use the word mild, I think it is more mild than just kind of open and full on, like what we would expect in a breakout room. But as you say, it doesn't happen. So there's a number of things that you can do. Yes, you can use the poll facility, or students are quite happy to use that. What I did was I would often have a presentation, use a PowerPoint, and then after so many slides, I'd stop. And then the students on the class handout that I'd sent to them earlier that day would then have an exercise to undertake. So I'm getting them then to have something in relation to what I've presented. Or in particular, what you can do is you can design some kind of worksheet, some kind of task to get them to do. Now in history, for instance, you can give them a particular source or a picture and get them to work and break it down. And then what I would do is I would get them to tell me the answer in the chat box. Okay, and then they don't have to the other students don't have to know it. So there's no embarrassment issue, you know, in case somebody gets it wrong. They send it through the chat facility, and then you can actually pick up as the answers are coming in. You can say, you know, well done, John, well done, Steve, well done, Jim, well done, da da da. Oh, so someone's got it wrong, but they've got an interesting point. You know, and then you can kind of pick up, and then you can actually say to that person, what's your answer? What made you choose that answer? Equally, the ones that got it right, and then you could start to draw out maybe issues of context around their answer. So there's ways and means to do it, but I think it's not just so black and white as in a classroom, which is, okay, I want you now to do something in pairs. Or, because again, when you want that kind of meaningful discussion online, it's slower to organize. It's more kind of clanky to get it working. For me, just keep things simple. Get the students to have a confidence in you that you're trying to work with them. So it's small steps at first, and then you can start to build it up. And like Wendy said, you can then maybe start to experiment with possibly doing breakout rooms. But again, one of the things that was found with students was that breakout rooms tend to work better when there is very active TA, a very active TA role. But if you've got, say, 100 students, then it's very hard for one TA and you to jump around all the different breakout rooms to actually find out what's going on. So as I've said, there's ways and means to make little steps, and you use the word mild, and I think that's the right way to kind of engage. But you cannot, I think, straight off the bat expect big open debates and everybody to be jumping in, because most students don't even do that in the classroom anyway in Hong Kong. So if it's not going to work in the classroom, it ain't going to work online anyway. So it's sometimes better to not be too ambitious, but to be pragmatic and small steps. So you build your confidence in what you're trying to do, and equally the students then have confidence and they can understand what you're trying to do. And then with that relationship, you can start to like augment it as the kind of course unfolds.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Morley. And Professor Lee, do you have any other ideas?
I think in my classes I like to do, I guess it completely depends on the subject of what you're teaching. But for example, I think in order to gauge students' participation, I often like to use error detection examples on Zoom. I will show them perhaps previous student work as samples. So they see the actual grading being done and the actual errors that were made. And then, of course, with the names removed, and they don't know what it is. But I think with those, automatically the students become very interested because they wanted to find out who made that mistake, what kind of mistake was that, who graded that, and then so what did other students get, and compare and so on. And then the moment they did that, actually they were learning in a way, because I always pick the errors that are not so obvious. So they would have to really dig into the example in order to find out what is going on. So I don't know, but for my field, I think that has worked somehow for a little bit. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. There are well, colleagues and students, maybe are thinking and putting down the questions. I do have a practical question for both of you. Maybe you can help. For the new academic year starting in September, I mean, hopefully we can shift back to face-to-face teaching. But however, if we need to continue online teaching, what kind of suggestions do you have for both teachers and students? I mean, in the very first place, how should we prepare within that limited time to maintain high quality online teaching and learner engagement? I understanding there are a lot to do, but within this, I mean, I think we have 2 months left. For you, what do you suggest? What should be done in the first place? Yeah.
Well, I think I'm thinking of 2020, 2021, and now 2022. I think there's 3 different student attitudes that have been apparent towards exclusively online learning. The first one was kind of first 2020 was like a disorientation. Everybody trying to adjust. And in a sense, teachers just trying to teach. And it was a case of trial and error. When it came to 2021, we were now with a bit of experience, a bit of empirical knowledge. There was 1 or 2 forums and conferences and things. So there's a bit of knowledge sharing amongst teachers. People are getting a little bit more confident and understanding, and I would even say a little bit more tolerant towards it, because then standards of teaching and learning were rising. There was a drop in the first year between where we were in terms of classroom teaching to online teaching, and then it's rebounded. Okay, and now students are kind of in a sense of being institutionalized, I think. A kind of like zombie-like reality, which is like, oh, is this really still going on? And so they're becoming more passive. And so again, the issue is, I think, how can the content of what we teach? I mean, Wendy made three words: content, teaching and learning context, and then the learners. Thinking about those 3 things in the design of courses, and then reframing them in accordance with the student profile and student attitude. You can be a fantastic teacher, you can have fantastic materials, but if the students don't buy into it, you're talking to yourself. And when it's online, it's even more difficult to get students to buy into it. So I think, again, good teachers are very, very audience focused first. But what I'm trying to say here is there needs to be an awareness that the kind of mentality or profile of student towards online learning has changed in the 3 years. But saying that, you know, there has been teaching projects at different universities, not just CUHK, and even departments have created strategies now to think about what they're doing with online teaching. So you find that online teaching now is actually in many departments very, very good. I don't want to generalize, but there's teachers across the university that are very, very good. So there has been a kind of upturn, but equally, while the quality maybe of content has gone up, student attitudes once again have kind of peeled back a little bit. So it's going to be very interesting, I think, in 2022 September, if we are online, because you will have year 4 students who are essentially the 4th year of almost like an open university course. And we're not an open university. Open university in Hong Kong, open university in UK has very particular approaches as to how you teach when you're online. And we kind of buy a little bit into that, but we're not wholly embracing that because we are still a campus-based university, even if we're not in campus. So I think that issue is, again, something we try to temper a little bit. But for me, as I've said, it's really about student attitude, trying to gauge that. That's a really, really good point as to where you can then work from in terms of reframing courses in order to, again, make it pertinent to knowledge development and motivational development, etc.
Thank you, Professor Morley. I think you have made very important points. And how about Wendy?
I think even if we were to go back to resume face-to-face classes completely in the fall, it would be very difficult for students to completely forget about what they've experienced the previous years. So they would expect us instructors to have materials online, or they would expect us to have some of the things that we did with them in the previous years to continue in that regard. So I think just surviving as as instructors in the coming years, I think while we try to enhance our own pedagogy and all of our teaching materials, I think we have to be very flexible and just play it by ear a little bit, because sometimes students need a little bit of time to get back to the classrooms too. They may not be as used to it as before, and then maybe the online materials can come in handy at that point to ease their discomfort, and then maybe can supplement alongside. So I don't know, it's difficult, but I think we because students, if they're sick, they will expect a lecture to be recorded. They will expect some materials given to them. But before, is in face-to-face situations, they may not have expected that to happen. So I think a lot of the mentality is changing, and so we have to be flexible. Yeah.
Sorry, just to add, Wendy, I think in some ways it has to continue. Even if we're face-to-face teaching, in some respects, it will be like online teaching, not in the sense of the teacher being on Zoom, but the way the students think and learn, because they've been so conditioned in the last 3 years to they behave differently in terms of learning when they're online. So for instance, in subjects like history, I've been in Hong Kong long enough to have a comparative of different generations of students. And now the way that students read is different from the past, and the volume of what they read is different from the past. And online, they just want very short, very immediate, very accessible. You could even say it's Google kind of based information. If you expect them to just go back into the library, that's not going to happen. But they're going to continue their habits. So again, how you as a teacher kind of not drill them, but how you socialize them into the path of learning that you want is going to be very, very important. Some students will get it quite quickly, and again, some will get it less quickly. So it's again coming to make sure that those that are the weakest are not in any disadvantaged position. But I think for many, many students, they will continue in their generic critical thinking process as if they are still online, even when they're back in the classroom, because they're just so used to it. It's been so long now, it's just so normal to them.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. I think the landscape has totally and completely changed, reformed. And so anyway, if time allows, I believe there will be many more issues to be discussed. And anyway, thanks again for both of you for your wonderful presentation and fruitful discussion. And wholeheartedly, thanks for your contribution to the university's teaching and learning. And also thank you for everyone for staying with us this afternoon. And I'd like to wish you all a good weekend. And hopefully we will have a chance to discuss such important topic again in the future. Okay, thank you. Goodbye. Thank you.